partially slipped out from a compartment where it had been carefully tucked away, hidden from view. A relic from a time long gone. Raising an eyebrow, the tramp studied the Polaroid. There were 4 faces there, a man and 3 young women. A professor and his students. Wrapped in coats, hats, and scarves, they stood with their backs to the Bodleian Library in Oxford, huddled together for warmth or out of habit, forever trapped inside one of the coldest days of that winter. The tramp lifted his head and grinned at Perry as if he had recognized Oxford from a film or a newspaper clipping. Or he might just as well have noticed that one of the girls in the snap was the woman now standing in front of him. She had gained weight and wrinkles, her hair was shorter and straighter, but her eyes were the same, barring the hint of sadness. He tossed the photo aside. Perry watched for a few seconds, no more, the Polaroid fly into the air then flutter to the ground. She flinched as though the photo were alive and might have been hurt in the fall. Panicking, she shouted to the tramp that people were on their way to Helfer, the police, the gendarmerie, her husband. She waved her hand to show her wedding ring, painfully aware in that moment that the girl she once was would have mocked her for flaunting the symbol of her marital status as if it were an amulet. But there were enough reasons the man would not believe her, not least the catch in her voice. The alley was deserted, the light draining from the sky. How far had she strayed from the main road? She could still hear the sound of traffic, but it was muffled, as though coming from behind a glass wall. Suddenly she was afraid. The tramp was motionless for an awkward moment. So still was the air that Perry thought she could make out the scuttle of a mouse in the pile of rubbish nearby, rummaging while its heart, no bigger than a pistachio, drummed in its tiny chest. The alley felt outside the realm of Istanbul's cats, outside the city borders and, in that instant, outside this world. Calmly, the man fished for something in his coat pocket and pulled it out. It was a plastic bag containing a tiny tube of solvent. He took the tube and squeezed the entire contents into the bag. Next he blew air into it, making a small balloon. He smiled at his creation, an idyllic snow globe in which every flake of snow that ever fell was either diamond or pearl. Placing it over his nose and mouth, he inhaled heavily, once, twice, then a longer 3rd time. When he raised his head again, his expression had altered, there and not there. He was a glue addict, Perry understood. Only now did she notice the broken blood vessels in his eyeballs, like cracks on scorched earth. A voice inside told her to go back to her daughter and her car, but she stood so still the adhesive might just as well have been spilled onto her feet, fixing her to the spot. The tramp offered the plastic bag to one of the children, who, in her excitement, almost snatched it from him. She huffed noisily while the other girl waited her turn, impatient and irritated at being the last. Glue, the favorite treat of street children and underage prostitutes, the magic carpet that carried them, as light as feathers, over the roofs and domes and skyscrapers into a far-off kingdom where there was no fear and no reason for fear, no pain, no prisons, no pimps. They stayed in that Eden for as long as they could, sucking golden grapes off the stalks, nibbling on juicy peaches. Safe from hunger and cold, they chased ogres, jeered at giants and stuffed genies back into the bottles from which they had escaped. Like all sweet dreams, this one, too, came with a price. The glue dissolved the membrane of their brain cells, attacked their nervous systems, destroyed their kidneys and livers, devouring them, inch by inch, from inside. I'm calling the police, Perry yelled, louder than needed. Not the right thing to say, she thought to herself and added, even louder, my daughter Sal Reedy called. They'll be here any minute. As if that were his cue, the tramp rose to his feet. His moves were slow and deliberate, perhaps to give her enough time to change her mind, or else to make it clear that none of what was about to happen was his fault. The 2 children were nowhere to be seen. When they had left and where they had gone, Perry had no idea. They followed the orders of the tramp. He was the sultan of the back streets, the emperor of uncollected rubbish and open cesspools, of everything unwanted and abandoned, the magnanimous collector of it all. Not his features but the intensity with which he carried himself reminded Perry of someone she thought she had left locked in the past, someone she had loved like she had loved no one else. Tearing her gaze away from the man, for a second or so, Perry glanced at the Polaroid on the ground. It was one of the few photos from her time at Oxford that she had kept over the years, and the only photo of Professor Asa. She could not afford to lose it. When she looked back, she was startled to see that the tramp's nose was bleeding. Thick drops of blood splattered his chest, a scarlet so bright it resembled paint. Still shuffling towards her, he didn't seem to be aware of it. Perry heard a gasp, her own voice unfamiliar to her ears, as she caught sight of a glint of steel. The Toy Istanbul, 1980s. They came late on a Friday night. Like owls, they waited for the evening to throw a black mantle over the city before seeking their prey. Perry's mother, who had gone to bed past midnight, after cooking one of her specialties, slow-roasted lamb with mint leaves, was the last to hear the pounding on their front door. By the time Selma was up and awake, the police were already inside the house, ransacking the room her sons shared. After Thuride, as though incapable of forgiving herself, Selma would never again have a full night's sleep. She would become a nocturnal creature herself. Although the police were examining every last item, it was clear from their behavior that they were here for the older son, Umit. They made him stand alone in a corner, and forbade him to exchange even a glance with his family. Seeing him in this state, 7-year-old Perry felt a sadness so pure that it bordered on despair. This she had never voiced aloud, but Umit was her favorite brother. Large, hazel eyes that crinkled around the corners with every smile, a wide forehead that made him look wiser than his years. Like her, he had a tendency to blush easily. Unlike her, he was full of good spirits, as befitted his name, Hope. Despite the age gap between them, Umit had always been close to Perry, playing along with her silly games for no reason but love, pretending to be a kidnapped prince aboard a pirate ship or a scheming wizard atop the mountain. Whatever the story of the day called for. At university, chemical engineering, Umit had become somewhat withdrawn. He grew a luxuriant, walrus-like mustache, and put up on his walls pictures of people Perry had never seen before, a grandfather with a hoary beard, a man with round wire spectacles and an open face, another with wild hair and a dark beret. There was also a woman with pinned-up hair and a white hat. When Perry had asked who they were, her brother had explained, "That is Marx, the other, Gramsci. The one with the beret is Comrade Chao," Perry had said, clueless as to what he was talking about but affected by the ardor in his voice. "How about her?" "Rosa, I wish my name were Rosa." Umit had smiled. "Your name is more beautiful, believe me, but, if you wish, I'll call you Rosa Perry. Maybe you'll be a revolutionary." "What's a revolutionary?" Umit had paused, searching for an appropriate answer. "Someone who wants every child to have toys and no child to have too many." "Okay," Perry had said guardedly. She had liked half of what she had heard, disliked the other half. "How many is too many?" Laughing, Umit had ruffled her hair, her question lingering in the space between them, unanswered. Now it was the same posters that the police were ripping off the walls. When there was nothing left to shred, they checked the books, all of which belonged to Umit, as Hakan was not much of a reader. The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, The Condition of the Working Class in England by Friedrich Engels, The Permanent Revolution by Leon Trotsky, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, Utopia by Thomas More, Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. Flicking through the pages with a look of irritated frustration, they seemed to be hunting for personal letters and notes. Though they uncovered none, they still confiscated the books. "Why are you reading this shit?" The police chief grabbed a book, The Kiss of the Spider Woman, and shook it in Umit's direction. "You are a Muslim Turk. Your father is a Muslim Turk, your mother is a Muslim Turk. 7 generations, the same. What is it to you, huh, all this foreign crap?" Umit stared at his bare feet, his toes, round and clean, pressed against one another as though for safety. "If they have a problem, damn Westerners, It's their problem, the man said. In our country everyone is happy. We don't have classes over here. We don't even know what the word means. Did you ever hear someone ask, "Hey, what's your class?" Of course not. We are all Muslim and we are all Turks. Full stop. Same religion, same nationality, same everything. Which part of that don't you get? The inspector moved close to Umit, leaning forward as if to sniff him. This country had 3 military takeovers to put an end to such bullshit. Now it's cropping up again. You think we'll allow it? Your books are full of lies. They're written in venom. Maybe you've been poisoned, have you? Umit said nothing. I'm asking you a question, imbecile, the man yelled, his nostrils flaring. Have you been poisoned? I said. No, Umit replied, his voice barely a whisper. I think you have, said the man, nodding in agreement with himself. You certainly look like you have. The mattresses, the wardrobe, the drawers, even inside the wood-burning stove. No nook, no cranny went uninspected. Whatever they were looking for they seemed unable to find, which made them angrier. They're hiding it. Search the rest of the house, ordered the police chief. He was smoking one cigarette after another, flicking the ashes on the floor. Excuse me, hiding what exactly? Mensur ventured, his thinning hair tousled, his striped pajamas rumpled, slippers on his feet, from the opposite corner of the room where the rest of the family had been made to it. I'll shove it up your arse when we find it, the police chief replied. As if I don't know. Wincing at the harshness of the words, Perry held her father's hand. But their eyes were fixed on her brother. She worried for Umit, whose face had turned as pale as a waning moon. The police riffled through the other bedrooms, the bathroom, the toilet, the pantry where they kept the okras they had dried and the cucumbers they had pickled. From inside the kitchen came the sounds of drawers being opened, boxes grubbed about in, cutlery tossed around. Where once had been neatly ordered shelves with lace trim, now there was disarray. An hour passed, maybe more. Outside, the faintest strip of light broke through the leaden sky, like a baby tooth cutting through raw flesh. What about the girl? Asked the police chief. He flicked the cigarette button to the carpet and crushed it with the heel of his shoe. Did you check her toys? Selma, her gaze fixed on the carpet she had cleaned earlier in the day, interjected, there must be a misunderstanding, Efendim *, ours is a decent family. We are all God-fearing people. Ignoring the comment, the man turned to Perry. Where are your things, child? Show us. Perry's eyes widened. Why was everyone interested in her toys? Not that she had too many, the revolutionaries, the police. I'm not telling you. Mensur, still holding Perry's hand, pulled his daughter back and murmured, hush. Let them look, we have nothing to worry about. Then, directing his words at no one in particular, he said, she keeps them in a trunk under her bed. A few minutes later, when the police chief re-emerged with his men behind him, it was the expression on his face more than the object he held between his fingertips that alarmed Perry. Well, what do we have here? Perry had never seen a gun before. In contrast to those on TV, this one seemed so small and cute that for a moment she wondered if it were made of chocolate hidden inside a cradle. Under a dolly. How convenient. I swear on the Holy Quran, we know nothing about this, said Selma, her voice brittle. Of course you don't, woman, but your son does. It's not mine, Umit said, his cheeks flushed. They asked me to keep it for a few days. I was going to return it tomorrow. Who are they? Asked the police chief. He sounded happy. Umit took a ragged breath, sinking into silence. Outside rose the incantation of the muezzin calling from a nearby mosque, there is no God but God. Prayer is better than sleep. All right, off we go, ordered the police chief. Take him in. Mensur, whose face had frozen at the sight of the gun, said, please, there must be an explanation. My son is a good boy. He'd never hurt anyone. The police chief, who had taken a few steps towards the door, turned back on his heels. Always the same crap. You don't keep an eye on your children, they mingle with godless communist bastards, they get themselves into all sorts of shit. When it's too late, you wail and beg. Wah wah. Why do you make babies if you won't take care of them, you fucking morons, can't control your dicks. With an abrupt move the police chief grabbed Menser's pajama bottoms and pulled them down to his knees, revealing crisp white, though slightly worn, underwear. A couple of policemen chuckled at the sight. Others feigned indifference. Perry felt the energy in her father's hand ebb, his fingers grew light and bloodless, the hand of a cadaver waiting to be dissected. Her father's silence, her father's shame, her father whom she had adored, revered, loved and idolized since the day she had uttered her first word. By the time Menser, trembling, had pulled up his pajama bottoms, the police officers were through the door, taking Umit with them. The family would not see Umit for 7 weeks, during which he remained in solitary confinement. Charged with membership of an illegal communist organization, he had confessed to owning the gun, after he was stripped naked, blindfolded, strapped onto a metal bed frame and given electric shocks. When the electrodes were attached to his testicles and the voltage was doubled, he admitted to being the leader of a cell that was plotting a series of assassinations of state officials. The acrid smell of charred flesh, the coppery smell of blood, the tart smell of urine and the cinnamon smell of the chewing gum of his chief torturer, an officer named Hose Hassan, so called because of his inventive torture techniques with a garden hose. Each time Umit passed out he was revived with cold water and soaked with buckets of salt water to increase the conductivity. In the mornings, the same police officers would apply medicinal ointment to his injuries so that they could continue the abuse in the afternoon. As he rubbed the balm into Umut's wounds, Hose Hassan would complain about his low salary and lengthy working hours, and how his daughter had eloped with an older man who was a father to a child and a husband to another woman. The lovebird Chad returned, 6 months later, stone broke and scared. He could have killed them there and then, instead, he had spared their lives. Like many professional torturers, he was kind to his relatives, respectful to his superiors and cruel to everyone else. In between sessions, Umit was made to listen to the screams of other prisoners, just as they were made to listen to his own. Again and again, the national anthem would blare out over loudspeakers. Once, during an electric shock, they forgot to put a towel in his mouth, a simple oversight. The family would not see Umit for 7 weeks, during which he remained in solitary confinement. Charged with membership of an illegal communist organization, he had confessed to owning the gun, after he was stripped naked, blindfolded, strapped onto a metal bed frame and given electric shocks. When the electrodes were attached to his testicles and the voltage was doubled, he admitted to being the leader of a cell that was plotting a series of assassinations of state officials. The acrid smell of charred flesh, the coppery smell of blood, the tart smell of urine and the cinnamon smell of the chewing gum of his chief torturer, an officer named Hose Hassan, so called because of his inventive torture techniques with a garden hose. Each time Umit passed out he was revived with cold water and soaked with buckets of salt water to increase the conductivity. In the mornings, the same police officers would apply medicinal ointment to his injuries so that they could continue the abuse in the afternoon. As he rubbed the balm into Umut's wounds, Hose Hassan would complain about his low salary and lengthy working hours, and how his daughter had eloped with an older man who was a father to a child and a husband to another woman. The lovebird Chad returned, 6 months later, stone broke and scared. He could have killed them there and then, instead, he had spared their lives. Like many professional torturers, he was kind to his relatives, respectful to his superiors and cruel to everyone else. In between sessions, Umit was made to listen to the screams of other prisoners, just as they were made to listen to his own. Again and again, the national anthem would blare out over loudspeakers. Once, during an electric shock, they forgot to put a towel in his mouth, a simple oversight. And he bit through his tongue, almost severing it in two. For a long time eating was a wretched experience, he could taste food only when he swallowed it. Torture, widely practiced in prisons, detention centers, and young offender institutions across the country in the aftermath of the 1980 coup d'état, was said to have slowed down by then, but it carried on just the same. Old habits died hard. Not that there were no changes. Falaka, the beating of the solace of feet, was, for the most part, replaced by suspension by the arms for hours, a cleaner method that left fewer marks. Burning with cigarettes and the extraction of nails or healthy teeth were also outdated. Shocks were quick, efficient, and left almost no traces. So wash forcing prisoners to eat their own excrement, drink each other's urine or spend hours in septic tanks. No visible signs of maltreatment. Nothing for Nazi journalists or Western human rights activists to detect, should they appear without warning. Eventually, Umit was sentenced to 8 years and 4 months without parole. After the verdict was announced, the Nalbantaglus paid regular visits to the prison on the outskirts of Istanbul. They arrived in varying combinations, depending on the day, Mensur with his younger son, Selma with her daughter, Mensur with his daughter, but never Mensur and Selma together. With dozens of other people they would sit at a wide, plastic table whose surface bore the marks of hundreds of anxious, painful encounters. They would keep their hands visible, as instructed, to make sure nothing was exchanged. In this state, they would try to mend the whole of silence with smiles that did not reach their eyes and words that snapped and slipped out of their grasp. On one occasion, when Umit stood up to leave, Mensur noticed a stain of blood on the lower back of his son's prison uniform. A blot the size and shape of a willow leaf. It had a name, the torture method that had caused it: bloody coke. Beaten and stripped, the inmates were forced to sit on a Coca-Cola bottle. It was said to be a cocktail served to a select few political prisoners, suspected gays and transsexuals rounded up from the streets. Mensur stared at the stain, dazed. He let out a gulping cry, gasping for breath, despite a desperate effort to keep himself composed. Fortunately Umit, already back in his ward, had not heard him. But Peri, whose turn it had been to accompany her father on that day, certainly had. She witnessed the entire scene, though for some reason it was only images, as if she were watching a silent film, that would stay with her. After that day, Mensur forbade Peri to visit prison. She should sit at home instead and write letters to her brother. She should tell him heartwarming, touching stories, small details of joy to give him faith in the human spirit. This Peri did for as long as she could. She composed letters with a delight she did not feel, about people she had barely met and incidents that had not quite happened in the way she described. Umit, as if he could see through the deceit, never responded. He would often appear in her dreams, however, from which she would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming. Sometimes she would manage to go back to sleep. Other times, she would slip out of bed, climb into her wardrobe and close the door from inside, trying to imagine what a prison cell must feel like. As she listened to her heart beating in that dark confined space, and fearful that the oxygen was slowly running out, she would pretend her brother was beside her, breathing. The horror of having Umit behind walls, instead of uniting the Nalbantaglus, distanced them from each other to the point of mutual enmity. Mensur blamed his wife. He was at work all day long, he argued. It was Selma who was supposed to have kept an eye on their son. Had she spent less time with fanatical preachers who promised her the scent of paradise and been more attentive to what went on under her nose, she might have prevented the calamity that had befallen them. Reticent, sullen, resentful, Selma, meanwhile, held her husband responsible. It was Mensur who had sowed seeds of godlessness into the mind of their son. All his soliloquies on materialism and free-thinking had led to this disaster. Over the years, Mensur and Selma's marriage had hardened into a hollow husk. Now the shell cracked wide open and they found themselves on separate sides of the rift. The air inside the house turned stifling, heavy, as if it had absorbed the sadness of its inhabitants. It seemed to young Peri thought no sooner had the bees and the moths entered through the open windows than they rushed in panic to fly out. Even those insatiable mosquitoes no longer sucked the Nalbantaglus' blood, for fear of ingesting their unhappiness. In the cartoons and movies that Peri watched, ordinary mortals were bitten by spiders, stung by hornets, after which they would transform into superheroes and lead exciting lives? In their case it was the other way round. Fleas and bugs, after coming into contact with the Nalbantoglus, metamorphosed into the ways of humans, crushed by the weight of feelings for which they had no use. It was around those days that Peri began to reframe her relationship with Allah. She stopped praying before going to sleep, contrary to the way her mother taught her, but she also refused to remain indifferent towards the Almighty, contrary to her father's advice. Instead, all the anguish and hurt she dared not to voice within earshot of her parents, she turned into a cannonball of words and hurled headlong at the skies. She began to quarrel with God. Peri argued with him about everything, asking questions to which Sheikh knew there were no easy answers, asking all the same, in a lowered voice so that no one could hear. How irresponsible of him to allow terrible things to happen to those who didn't deserve it. Could God see and hear through prison walls and across cell bars? If he could not, he was not all-powerful. If he could, and still did nothing to help those in need, he was not merciful. Either way, he was not what he claimed to be. He was an impostor. The anger Peri couldn't direct at her mother and her master Uzumbasfandi, the frustration she couldn't hold against her father and his drinking habits, the sorrow she couldn't convey to her elder brother and the weariness she felt towards her other brother, she mixed them all into a gooey batter and poured it into her thoughts on God. There it baked, in the furnace of her mind, rising slowly, cracking in the middle, burning around the edges. While her friends seemed as uncomplicated and light as the kites they flew, playing in the streets, joking around at school and taking every day as it came, Nazbari Nalbantoglu, an unusually intense and introverted child, was busily searching for God. God, a simple word with an obscure meaning. God, close enough to know everything you did, or even considered doing, yet impossible to react. But Peri was determined to find a way. For she had come to believe through some twisted logic of her own that if she were to bring together her mother's creator and her father's creator, she might be able to restore a harmony between her parents. With some kind of agreement as to what God was or was not, there would be less tension in the Nalbantoglu household even across the world. God was a maze without a map, a circle without a center, the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that never seemed to fit together. If only she could solve this mystery, she could bring meaning to senselessness, reason to madness, order to chaos, and perhaps, too, she could learn to be happy. The Notebook, Istanbul, 1980s. Come and sit with me, love, Mensur said to his daughter one rare evening when he was alone at the dinner table. Peri immediately did as told. She had missed him terribly. Although in the same house, he had been distant, absorbed in his own thoughts, a mere shell of the man he used to be ever since the day Umit was arrested. Let me tell you a story, Mensur said. Once, there lived a reed flute player in Istanbul, a Sufi but of the maverick kind. Whenever he saw a bottle of raki or wine, he'd scold those around him. Don't you know a drop off this liquor is a sin? Then he'd open the bottle, dip his finger inside, wait a few seconds, and take his finger out, dripping. I removed that sinful drop, he'd say. Now we can drink in peace. Mensur chuckled at his own words, a low, sad laugh. Peri studied her father, sensing in his question a lonely rebellion, viewed against what or whom. Tentatively, she asked, Baba, may I try it? What? You want to drink raki? Peri nodded. She had never given it a moment's thought before, but, now that she said she wanted it, she really did. It was a way of bonding with her father. Mensur shook his head. You are only 7. No way. 8, Peri corrected him. I'll be 8 this month. Well, I've always said better to have your first taste of alcohol at home with your parents than secretly outside. You shouldn't really drink before you're 18, Mensur mused. By that time, who knows if it'll be a load, thanks to those religious fanatics. Maybe they'll put a bottle or two on display somewhere. The exhibition of degenerate objects. Just like the Nazis and modern art, Yes, maybe you should take a sip before it's too late. Thus saying, Mensur filled a glass with water and added a generous splash of Reiki. While Peri watched the alcohol disperse in the water, her father watched her with a tender expression. See these drops? That's me and my mates. We dissolve in a sea of ignorance. Mensur raised his glass, and said, Shurf. Asterisk thrilled to be treated like an adult, Peri smiled. Shurf. If your mother sees us, she'll skin me alive in haste. Peri took a mouthful. Her face instantly twisted in disgust. It was dreadful. It was worse than anything she had ever tried. The bite ofinus, sharper even than its smell, burned her tongue, tickled her nose, brought tears to her eyes. How could her father drink this awful stuff every evening with such relish? Promise me, Mensur said, paying no heed to his daughter's reaction. Never buy into old wives' tales, if you know what I mean. Yes, yes, Peri said, after she had knocked back a glass of water and gulped a slice of bread to get rid of the taste in her mouth. Like when they say, don't jump over a child, he'll stop growing. If you crack your knuckles you'll break an angel's wings. Whistle in the dark, you'll invite shaitan. That kind of thing. That's right, all that nonsense. Listen, there's a rule I've come to respect and I advise you to do the same. Never believe anything you haven't seen with your eyes, heard with your ears, touched with your hands and grasped with your mind. Promise. Eager to please her father, Peri chirped, I promise, Baba. Pleased, Mensur beat his index finger in the air to accentuate his words. Education will save us. It's the only way forward. You must go to the best university in the world. He paused as he considered which university that might be. You are the only one among my children who can do this. Work hard. Save yourself from ignorance. Bigger promise. Bigger promise. There is one problem, though, Mensur said. Men don't want women too clever or too educated. I wouldn't want you to die a spinster. It's okay, I'm never going to get married. I'll stay with you. Mensur burst into laughter. Trust me, you don't want to do that. Just don't give your heart to anyone who doesn't care about science, knowledge. Biggest promise. Biggest promise. Peri slid down in her chair as a new thought entered her mind. What about God? We can't see him, can't hear him, can't touch him, but should we still believe in him? Mensur looked rueful. I'll let you in on a secret. When it comes to the Almighty, grown-ups are no less confused than kids. But is God real? Peri insisted. He'd better be. When I meet him in the next world, before he has a go at me, I'll ask him where he's been all this time. He's left us to our own devices for too long. Mensur popped a slice of cheese into his mouth and shook vigorously. Baba. Why didn't Allah help him? Why did he let all this happen? I don't know, my soul, Mensur said, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down. They fell quiet. Peri curled her toes and pressed her slippered feet on the carpet, sensing it would be wiser to change the subject. The mention of Haralder brother had darkened the already dim mood, like a cloud that drifts across the pale moon. What about heaven and hell? The trials and tribulations of hell had been a constant refrain throughout her education. The idea that her father might find himself in the abode of the damned with its boiling cauldrons, its punishing flames and its dark angels called Zabanister terrified her. Well, I'm not really heaven material, no. There are two possibilities: if God has no sense of humor, I'm doomed. Express train to hell. If he hasten, there's hope, I might join you in paradise. They say they have rivers flowing with the best wine. A wave of alarm swept over Peri. But what if Allah is as stern as mother always says he is? She whispered. Don't fret, we'll have a plan B, said Mensur. Make sure you put a pickaxe in my grave. I'll dig a tunnel out of wherever I end up. Peri's eyes widened. Hell is so deep, if you throw a pebble it takes 70 years for it to reach the bottom. Mother told me. I am sure she did. A silent sigh. Here's the good thing, a year on earth is only a minute in the afterworld. One way or another, I'll come and find you. His face brightened. Oh, I almost forgot. I've got something for you. From his leather bag Mensur produced a wrapped package, a silvery box tied up with a golden bow for me. Perry studied the package. Aren't you going to open it? There was a notebook inside. A beautiful, hand-stitched turquoise notebook with sequins and a mirrored mosaic on the cover. I know you're curious about God, Mensur said pensively. I can't answer all your questions. No one can, frankly, including your mum and that cuckoo preacher of hers. He downed the rest of his Reiki in a single swallow. I have no sympathy for religion, or for the religious, but you know why I'm still fond of God. Perry shook her head. Because he is lonely, Parasim, like me, like you, Mensur replied. All alone up there somewhere, no one to talk to. Okay, maybe a few angels, but just how much fun can you have with the cherubim?